Okay, we are back for another Tile Tech Talk with Noah Chitty of Crossville,
Hi,
our
Ring.
resident guru. And today we're going to be talking about gauged porcelain tile panels, a continuously growing category for the tile industry. And we're going to approach it. Obviously, a lot of folks who will be listening to this, watching this, will be familiar with gauged porcelain tile panels. But we're going to start with the basics for anyone who might be new or not familiar. We want to cover the core bases so that everyone can be
Okay.
part of the conversation, get where we're coming from. So,
Okay.
Noah, could you just straight out of the gate, I mean, this is like basic question, but what is a gauged porcelain tile panel?
Okay. Well, I guess we have to define it by the standards that we have now. So according to standards, ANSI A137.3 is the standard for gauged porcelain tile and gauged porcelain tile panels / slabs. It is defined as, I mean, I could read the exact definitions, but that's where the product standard sits for panels of porcelain that are produced to a specific thickness. And in this standard, it covers everything from 3 millimeters to 6.5. So it's basically a product standard for panels in the 1/8 inch to 1/4 inch range. It does address them in two different size range. So it calls them a gauge porcelain tile if they are less than a square meter, and a gauge porcelain tile panel or slab if they are a square meter or more.
Okay.
But that's where the definition lies. I mean, after that, it's really just breaking strength and sizing and that kind of thing.
Right. And obviously, when we're talking the panels, those are very large in terms of outer dimensions.
Yeah, for us, we're talking about an 1/8 inch or a 1/4 inch thick panel. Ours are 1 meter by 3 meters, so basically 39 inches by 118 inches, give or take an inch. And then we actually, through the same process, create our countertops too, which are a bigger size, 12 millimeters thick, but they fall outside the standard. So if we're just talking about our panels, the 1/8 inch and 1/4 inch material for us, and basically, a little over 3 foot by 10 foot. There are larger panels out there
Wow.
in the 1/4 inch range.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember when we first introduced this category, a lot of people were calling it thin tile because it's such a lean profile. And quickly, people like you intervened to change the nomenclature to reflect that they can be thicker, and something that to this day I do when I write about this product and share information with audiences on social media or through editorial placements is I always add somewhere, very often I add, it's tile measured in feet, not inches.
Right.
But when you say tile, they immediately start to think very familiar sizes. And I'm like, no, think really big.
Yeah. I mean, the term thin, the term thin was there for a while because they were thinner than the tile products that we had used to been using. I think for a lot of us, the big nature of it, the size was more different than the thin.
Mm-hmm.
But we couldn't keep using the word thin because we knew the technology was going to allow us to make thicker and thicker and larger tiles. So thin just didn't. Plus, there were some that thought thin had a bad connotation, and some that thought it had, depending on how you were using it. Look at the low profile, you can do tile over tile. Thin was great. Look at the, something else where somebody questioned whether it was durable enough. Then, thin wasn't something they wanted to do. So, but it wasn't the right term for creating standards and moving the category forward.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
we still use it,
It still
You
comes
still hear
out.
people call it thin tile, everybody.
Right. I still hear it too.
Yeah.
So what is the history of this category? I don't know how much you know, but I know it took a while for it to come over to the US. And so could you kind of give us a little bit of insight into the path of how this became something so prominent?
Yeah, I would say, I guess if we wanted to start in the beginning, I think around 2000,
Okay.
the first machines were created that would produce a tile that was larger than ever before. And then what happened was the manufacturers of that equipment started to sell it to other people who started to make some products. But in a lot of cases, it was such a new innovation that they couldn't sell the equipment, which is what they wanted, just to manufacturers, without proving that the product that it produced was a viable product. So they set up factories like the one that we use, Laminum, with the equipment, so a product could be made that then the market could then start to accept and that kind of thing. And I believe the philosophy was, if we create a market by showing that the product that this equipment can produce, then more manufacturers will buy the manufacturing equipment. So that process obviously takes a little while to create a market. So I would say, between 2000 and 2010, that was where it was. Products starting to be created, getting out there in the architectural and design community outside of the United States. I would say a lot of the beginning ones, and then, more heavy in the US for probably the last 10 years. I would say, we're at least in year 7 or 8 for us, where we've been bringing this product in. And selling it here. So I think it's probably, all the total market's probably got almost a 20-year history now. But if you talk to people, I would say, maybe 12 years, if you count maybe 5 pretty solid in Europe before 7 or 8 here. You could say it's in the 12 to 13 range. But I don't think it's going anywhere now. I mean, now it's a category, and, we've got some infrastructure around it.
Yeah. So how Crossville is usually relatively conservative in its approach to bringing in new things, and a very measured approach to make sure the market is able to accept anything new.
Yeah.
So in light of the broader category, how did Crossville fit into the mix in bringing it over here and making it a viable option for people to specify?
I mean, before Crossville brought in inventory and really started to push it, there were a few bringing in some inventory from overseas and that kind of thing. I would say that, we decided pretty early on that it was going to be a new category of material that had, real potential in the marketplace. So the first thing we did was just find a partner, in Laminum, who we could then partner with to start to bring these materials to the U.S. But it started pretty early on with an understanding that if you just hand a 10, and let's take the worst case scenario, not of material, but of what you had to teach somebody, an 1/8 inch thick piece of 10 foot tall by 3 foot wide porcelain. If you didn't start to give some training to contractors, then you weren't going to be viable. So I would say we did 2 things early on as Crossville, besides just bringing inventory into the U.S. in a pretty large quantity to have available. We thought standards development was important to create an infrastructure to the category. And we thought training of tile contractors was going to be super important. So because we could get the material specified, that didn't seem to be a problem. The design community loved beautifully aesthetic material with less grout joints. That wasn't a problem. But if you got the job, you had to have somebody to put it in. And if the contractor or the installer was uncomfortable, then it was going to increase the price of installation, and it was going to drive people away from, from the product.
Yeah.
So those are probably the first 2 things that we did from a technical services side, was to really look at what standards are needed and what type of training for the installation community in order to make in order to grow the category.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I remember it being truly exciting to have something so innovative to bring to the market and talk about, and the potential. Yeah. So in terms of installation potential, how did you see it being used, and what has been the evolution of product application?
I think in the beginning, because we were trying to figure out where it was going to go, I think a lot of the conversation that we had was about tile over tile, because remember, we started with just the 3 millimeter material. Mm-hmm. So we didn't have the thicker one yet. And a lot of that conversation in the early days was whether 3 millimeter could go on both the walls and the floor, because there were a few manufacturers who were putting 3 millimeter on the floor. But we quickly realized that might be great if you have a trained installation community and a different type of construction that I think a lot of these manufacturers who are bringing the products over from Italy and other places, they have different construction, they don't have wood frame construction and those kind of things. So for us, we saw 3 millimeter as risky in the potential of a fledgling category, as things could go wrong there. So we saw it as a, we saw the 3mm as a wall product. We quickly, within a year, got a thicker product, our 5.6, that we felt was, we could go on the floor if installed correctly. But in the beginning, we talked about tile over tile a lot, because you could go in and you could refresh a shower or a elevator lobby without adding a lot of, bulk thickness to the installation or weight, because the product is so lightweight. But since those early days, I would say that's not, it's not just being used like that anymore. It's in new construction, and it's being, all kinds of different things people are doing with it. So, one of the things that's been interesting lately is we have, so gauge porcelain tile is what we're talking about, and we're going to talk about 1/8 inch and 1/4 inch material. But now we have 12mm that we call, porcelain countertops or porcelain slabs. And there's been an interesting thing in the last year, sort of, if you take COVID out of whatever the last year means, that fabricators are looking at gauge porcelain tile, the 1/8 inch and 1/4 inch material, as a way to expand their business. And tile contractors are looking at the 12mm material, looking to as a way to, expand their business into some of that fabrication type thing. So that evolution of who's using the material and what are they using it for and what are they creating with it, is it furniture and reception desk, or is it walls and floors? I think it immensely evolved into the market and what people are doing with it, and mainly because people are getting more comfortable with the material. Nobody's the guinea pig anymore. These installations have been done successfully.
Yes.
So
And I
I'd say
will
that's
share, when I share this talk, I'll include a link to, on the Crossville website, we have a lot of case studies, and exterior, interior. One of my favorites that's relatively new at the point where we're recording this is a residential high-rise condo that had a long, expansive wall, and they used 2 kinds of Crossville porcelain tile panels,
okay.
but part of them, it's on a hidden door, like a
Nice.
hidden door that leads to a master suite.
Yeah.
And, because it's such a lean profile and so expansive in size, it looks seamless.
Right.
But surprise, there's a door there. Love.
It's beautiful. The doors are a little bit tough because we had some in those very early pictures of doors, and there's no real rules around doors, because, is it a metal door? Is it a wooden door? Is it a pocket door? Is it a sliding door? Is it, so people are calling like, how do I do a door? And it's like, well, let's start with what does your door look like?
Yeah, big topic.
Yes.
Yeah.
But
So we'll
yeah,
be
lots of
sharing,
different new ways.
yeah, some really beautiful case studies, and they keep coming in. And from my vantage point, it's interesting to see how quickly that uptick occurred, because we've been collecting them for years now, and now it's pretty consistent that we see a lot of those contributed.
Yeah.
So in terms of, obviously, we're at a point where there's market acceptance, there are educated installers who are able to work with it. So how has, like, the setting material side of the industry stepped up to support this growing category?
I think, we work with every major setting material manufacturer in the beginning to make sure that we're recommending the right, mortars and that kind of thing. I think the evolution has been that in the beginning we were taking, so we had this new piece of tile that had to have some different installation practices. And then we can get into this in a minute, but the first thing was to create an installation standard. So first you had to have a product standard, the one we talked about, but probably as important, if not more important, was the installation standard, and we can kind of get into that. But so we worked with all the mortar manufacturers in the beginning to find the right materials to go with it, especially if the material had a fiberglass mesh on the back, because that's a little different than bonding to straight porcelain. So I would say the way it's evolved with a lot of the mortar manufacturers, not all, but most, they looked at the materials that we were taking off the shelf and that we were tweaking, not really changing what they were supposed to do, but say taking it to, if you have a range of water that you're supposed to add to the material, what we were doing was taking that to the highest end of the range, because we were trialing out so much thin set on the back of the panel and on the substrate at the same time. We really needed the mortar to have a long open time before it started to dry out or extend. We didn't have mortars specifically made to put 10 feet of tile up before. So we were using the mortars that we had in order to get them to do what we wanted to do, which was basically stay open longer enough for us to get the panel married to the wall or the floor, and then when we're going to try and embed it and get all the air out, that the mortar is still flowable and usable in order to let that happen. That was the two things that we needed. So we used what we had in order to get there in the beginning. And I would say in the last few years, what we've seen mortar manufacturers do is create some material specifically for the category that gave you those things, gave you the strength when you needed it, the extended open time when you needed it, and was made to work with the material in a different way. And then in the last couple of years, we've even seen some of the materials evolve to like new technologies, you know, like maybe a hybrid technology of not a cement-based mortar, but more of an adhesive type mortar, which could speed installation and reduce weight and that kind of thing. So we've seen a couple of the mortar manufacturer, the setting material manufacturers move in that direction. So, you know, everything's evolved from those early days. The tools have evolved, the setting materials have evolved, standards have evolved. So it's
Yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, speak to the standards. You know, you mentioned that was really a precursor to any of this, is getting those standards in place. How did that happen? What associations were involved? All that good stuff.
Oh man, so the background work is a lot of work. You know, what we felt was, okay, you know, one is we've got to make two communities comfortable with gauge porcelain tile in order for it to really grow as a category and be, you know, a solid piece of the pie. We have to create comfortability in the specification market. And the only way to create comfortability in the specification market is to create a standard and say, hey, we're going to make sure that if you specify this, that you get some minimum performance criteria that you can feel comfortable about. And I think that is absolutely necessary for somebody who says, well, I want to use the material, but how do I know the material is going to be okay? You need to be able to say, hey, it's manufactured to these minimum quality standards, and we know that's going to be successful. And then you need to have something for the installer. So the installer doesn't think, well, you know, I've got 5 different manufacturers telling me to install this in 5 different ways. There's no standards for how I install it. So if something happens, that sounds like it's all on me, because they're going to say the material was fine and you just installed it incorrectly. So what we really needed to do was have this is the way you install it. If you get this material that has a minimum performance you know, a quality material, and you install it in this way, we can prove that it can perform in these ways. So those two things, to make those two communities more comfortable for the future, the installation community and the specification, the A&D market, we had to create standards. So the first thing we did was create a product standard. Here's what the product is, because you can't say how to install it until you say what it is. We learned that with other standards in the past. So we created ANSI A137.3, the product standard. Here's what it must meet: breaking strength, water absorption, all those kind of things. At the same time, we created ANSI A108.19. So you asked kind of like who the players were and that kind of thing. In the beginning of the product standard took 5 years to complete. So in the beginning, what Crossville did, and some of the stuff we normally don't talk about because you do a lot of this stuff behind the scenes. What Crossville did was try to get the other manufacturers who were selling the material in the US to come together and collaborate on creating a standard. But a lot of the manufacturers, you know, were outside of Europe and not, you know, part of that process of things in general, where there's less, especially installation standards in Europe. There aren't as much. There's product standards, but not as much installation. So we spent a little while saying, hey, let's all rally together, because we're a tiny little market now. But when we grow a huge market, we're going to have all these materials coming in from places where we don't know what the quality is. And how bad would that be for us to create a market that then others bring inferior material in and destroy? So we spent about a year trying to rally the troops of, you know, of competitive manufacturers. And there wasn't a lot of interest for whatever reason. So after maybe a year or two, and this is before we started the 5-year process, we pushed the issue a little bit by saying, okay, well, we're at least going to put on paper what our material will do. And if you guys are willing to then come to the table, then we can start to establish a baseline of what, our material, because at that point, all the materials on the market were pretty high quality materials. So there wasn't an inferior one we were trying to weed out at that point. So we did that. We had to invest some money to do a pretty large scale testing project to establish like the first baseline of information. So we did that, and that kind of started to bring some people to the table. And then 3 years into that process, when we knew we were about 2 years kind of left to create it, we started the installation standard, because the goal was to release a product standard and an installation standard at the same time. That would have been the ideal outcome. So 3 years in, 2 years before we were done, we started an installation standard, and it took us 2 years to write ANSI A108.19, which is the interior installation standard for gauge porcelain tile using thin-set, cement-based, mortars. And both of those standards passed. So you asked who was involved. There was an ad hoc group of the ANSI A108 committee, which is a 65-member committee. There were 10 of us on an ad hoc group that basically draft the standard and then send it to committee. It was a completely different group of tile manufacturers working on the product standard at the same time. So I was kind of uniquely, I was in both, working with the manufacturers on the product standard and trying to push the installation standard, because I really felt like the installation standard was more important than the product standard. I knew we couldn't have one without the other, but telling people how to install it, because what we saw even when we started to train tile contractors was this manufacturer was telling them to do it this way, and this manufacturer was telling, and everybody was doing the best they could with what information they had, but it still left everybody kind of, well, which is the right way? So at year 5, we had both documents created, and we sent them to committee. And I think as a sign of the really good job we did to seek consensus and be thorough about the process, both of those standards passed on their first ballot, which isn't usually, the case. Normally you've got to go through some process of, I don't like this or I don't like that. So we've had that for over 2 years now. We've had 137.3 and A108.19. I mean, I can keep talking about it because there's more going on. Do you want me to try and fill you into the end?
Yeah, I mean, I think the value in what you're sharing is for people to understand how much goes into ensuring the product and the installation process is verifiable. I mean, that's a big deal, and we appreciate what's happening out in the marketplace and its needs.
Well, do you want me to kind of finish the story?
Yeah,
I mean, because we're still working on stuff. I mean, so A108.19, the interior installation standard, was finished 2 years ago. There were no negatives at ballot, but there were affirmative comments. So there were some things that so it doesn't stop a standard from getting produced. So what we did was basically let that standard kind of go out into the market for 2 years and let any more things that, people saw about it. So actually within the last year, we balloted a revision to A108.19. And the main 2 things that we changed, I would say, was there's a section in A108.19 for qualified labor where it says you really need to hire somebody who's been trained to install panels. That's going to be the best way for you to be successful. We expanded that section a little bit because more people are starting to train. So now it used to just say from a setting material or a tile manufacturer, get some training and show a certificate of completion, or use an ACT certification, which is a skill set test, which shows that you already know how to do it. We added NTCA, National Tile Contractors Association, and the work that the IMI does through the union. They're both doing training. So we added that in as to another place you could get training. And then we made a non-mandatory appendix to give people a kind of a little bit of a roadmap to what you should train, like what training means. So that's out now. So, if you have A108.19 from 2 years ago, you should really get A108.19 from 3 months ago. That book's been republished and that new stuff is in there. Then we started, almost the day we got published A108.19, somebody in the committee spoke up and said, well, why is it just interior? Shouldn't we have an exterior installation standard too? And as I quietly tried to back out of the room after the 5 years plus 2 years work,
kidding. Yes.
Yeah, so we basically started 2 years ago working on an exterior installation standard, just for vertical. I think it says vertical overhead soffits, that kind of thing, not horizontal. That went to ballot 2 months ago, and it appears that we will pass ballot on the first shot. There were 10 of us that worked on that too. It's probably still got a couple of months to go through the ANSI process to get approved. But it appears we will now have an interior and an exterior installation standard.
That's great.
So the sort of the last piece of the puzzle for Gage porcelain tile, I think in my mind, is handbook methods. So we have TCNA handbook for installation guidelines. So it's now kind of been decided that Gage porcelain tile should not just be shoved into the current details, which cover ceramic and glass tile, that they should maybe have their own details. Even though there's not that much different, you know, it's a little weird to mash them all up together.
Gotcha.
So the thought process is maybe we can create Gage porcelain handbook details for that could sit with those other two installation standards, interior and exterior, and maybe with the product standard, and they kind of all sit together. So we've been working on that for the last year, trying to get some consensus behind handbook details. And that'll really be, you know, that'll be kind of the last piece of the puzzle in my mind to an infrastructure. Product standard, installation standard inside and out, and guidelines for, you know, TCA handbook details. So that's where we're at with trying, you know, with what the next step is.
And that's, you know, you're so important in that process. I mean, you're part of the industry at large, and I mean, it's a journey.
You know, before I came to Crossville, I worked for another manufacturer as in technical services, and before that, I ran the lab and standards development at Tile Council. So it gives me a perspective because I knew what had to be done in order to get, you know, to get it done. So, you know, I can at least bring that little skill set to the table, you know, when others are trying to do it. So, and now even last week, the new thing is the 2 centimeter pavers. Which we don't manufacture, but there are some U.S. manufacturers. So that 137.3 standard, the product standard that covers 1/8 inch to 1/4 inch thick material, we always thought of it when we created as, well, what if things got thicker and we needed, now we've got table 4 for thin, I think, and table 5 for, you know, 1/8 inch and 1/4 inch. Would we need a table 6, 7, 8 as things got thicker? So now the conversation is a little bit of whether 137.3 should be expanded to include like the 2 CM pavers that we use for rooftops and landscaping material. And then that brings us to the conversation of should there be a standard for 12 millimeter porcelain slabs for countertops. Right. So should all that, you know, do all those need a product standard or an installation standard? And so it appears to never stop.
Clearly.
There's always, you know, something to do. And, you know, but if you don't create the, you know, if you don't put in the work to create those things in the background, you know, that in my mind, and I think in our company's mind, you know, because obviously we're spending money and you know, time to do these things, that's what you've got to do to create long-term viability. You know, anybody can sell a truckload of something once, but if you want to be selling it for the next 30 years and you want growth to increase every year, these are the things that have to happen in the background, whether you do them or somebody else you know, does them. So
true.
You know, but we're doing good. Things are, you know, things are progressing, and, you know, lots of people coming to the table. That's the good and the bad about committees, right? Is you've got consensus that you have to seek, which is difficult, but it also, you know, those committees are all making sure that it's not just manufacturers, it's manufacturers and installers and architecture. You know, everybody's viewpoint is coming to the table to make the final standard the best it can be. So in that way, you know, I think we create good things that are very usable for the market and do help grow the market at the end.
Right. And what is the process with all that hard work in getting the message out? I mean, I know we're having this conversation that hopefully some folks will watch, but how do we make sure that the market is aware of all that effort that assures them of the standards to specify confidently?
Probably the best way is just, you know, we try with education. So, you know, we wrote a CEU, you know, to make sure that people understood, what the standards were and that kind of thing. Like we changed all of our, for 5 years, we had literature that said, here's the way we think you should install it. We had to change all that literature to say, you should install it per this industry standard. So that gets the information out. And then I think a lot of it is just talking to people, and just, taking that opportunity. So we need to educate our A&D reps in order to have that conversation, in order to get that information put into the specification. And then you also create, you can create a guide spec, like a generic guide spec that somebody who is a spec writer could reference, to get the right numbers into their own specification. And we did a presentation for IMI a few weeks ago, and we used one of our CEUs to do that, and that contains some information. And I know they've been a great, I got a friend, Scott Conwell at IMI, who's just been a great advocate for education and training and that kind of thing. So there's a bunch of people pushing the message, about how to do it right, and how to do it from the top level down, from the specification or from the initial conversation down. So it takes time for anything to get traction. There's no doubt about that.
Very much so.
But I think we're doing a pretty good job at it.
And it's, like I said, over the years, to see the actual case studies come in, which means this product is getting specified and people really understand how cool it is. So is there anything new? Like, I know for Crossville specifically, we've got some new looks coming out in the near future at the time that we're recording this. So that'll, the beautiful tile itself is certainly great to talk about. And you have addressed pavers and some things like that. Is there anything else we should be on the lookout for? Or?
As far as gauge porcelain tile, like where the technology is going, I don't think it'll get too much bigger. I mean, we're at 3 foot by 10 foot, and others are at 5 foot by 10 foot. I don't see the piece getting that much bigger. So the evolution seems to be going, right now what we do is we sell gauge porcelain tile, 1/8 and 1/4 inch. We feel like the direction should be tile contractor tile install, where 12 millimeter, or if you had 20 millimeter, fabricator countertop furniture install. But like I said before, those worlds are meshing a little bit.
Okay.
So I think where the technology going is, what can we create? What products can we create for what market? And that could possibly change. Some of the panels, I would say the direction is, can we put veins through the body? That's for sure a technology that's starting to emerge. Some are doing it in this way, some are doing it in that way. I would say it's still, somewhat in the beginning stages of what it can be. But when when you want to compete, it's not so much, I think, for the thinner materials where that's important, but for the thicker materials where you want to compete against natural stone and quartz, where they're thicker and you can just profile the edge, that could be something, that could help grow the market. Although, we're pushing the 12 millimeter, and the market's going minimalistic. And at 12 millimeter, I think that technology for through-body veining is less important. But I think that's one of the places it's going. And then, they just keep getting better at, inkjet printing and manufacturing. So, I mean, the looks are just unbelievable, and sometimes you don't even know if they're not, you got to walk around and see if there's a back pattern, to see if it's not natural stone. So
isn't that wild?
I think you'll see that with the new looks that we're coming out with. And then we're also exploring some of those technologies of, where does the veining go, or what kind of body look, are you going to have? So that seems to be the next kind of evolution for the moment. But, every 2 years they bring something new to the equipment fair, and we see where it goes. So
how does this product category speak to issues of sustainability? Is this a good option for those specifying where sustainability is a priority?
Yeah, probably more. So in the beginning we talked about sustainability from the standpoint of, hey, this material is lighter. So, normal tile is about 4 to 5 pounds per square foot. Our thinnest panel at 1/8 inch is 1.7 pounds per square foot, and the thicker one's 2.9. So you're cutting weight by somewhere between 50% and 60, 70%. So just the amount of material you could get on a truck could help with those kind of sustainability questions of just environmental impact. Plus these new presses that they created, they're actually more energy efficient too. And when you fire something thinner, you're using less energy in the kiln. So we kind of looked at those as sustainability messages. Then we kind of looked at tile over tile as also a sustainability message, because if you didn't have to rip out existing installations, if we could give you a thin enough profile to not rip out existing installations and not have to put that material in landfill, there's a sustainability message there for sure. So I would say it's evolved from lightweight, efficient manufacturing, and none of the original goes away, you just add on to it, to the sustainability message of not landfilling tile over tile. And now the market's asking for new things with new versions of LEED and other building rating systems. So for our panels specifically, we now have an EPD, an environmental product declaration, an HPD, a health product declaration, and a declare label from the Living Building Challenge Institute things. So, and all of those show what really a lot of tile will show in general, which is non-hazardous materials. We can be very transparent about what what's in it for the end user, and then our environmental impact. Because some people really want to understand greenhouse gases and carbon footprint and those kind of things. So I think we've evolved the message of sustainability. And we've got a pretty good message with the panels for the marketplace. However, whatever path of sustainability they're looking for, I think we have something to offer there.
Yeah, and those selling points for sustainability translate, the installation efficiency of tile over tile. I mean, somebody doing a renovation where time is key. And
yeah, when you can turn a hotel room or a hospital room back over faster, the cost of material and install is really not the deciding factor. Getting somebody into that room, whether it's a hotel room or a hospital room, is worth way more money than a couple of dollars a square foot in tile.
Absolutely. So yeah, we see a lot of that in our case studies, that it was selected because of that tile over tile capability. Pretty impressive.
Yeah, but we're seeing more and more of it in new construction now, and more floors, and so definitely people doing all kinds of different things with it.
Do you have a sense between residential and commercial for the panel category?
I don't really have a sense. I mean, I would say as Crossville, I think we use the numbers of, we're 80% commercial, 20% residential, but then we have a distribution arm through Crossville Studios, and I don't think those numbers are the same there as far as 80-20. I think there's, a lot more residential sales going on with that part of the company. The other thing that we spent a lot of time training tile contractors. And I felt like we concentrated on commercial.
Sure.
So this database of 2,000 people that us and our setting material partners had trained, I think they were mostly commercial. So
right.
Now it's interesting that 5 years into it, we're seeing more of a push into residential. So whereas 2 years ago we said, okay, we're going to ramp down this training effort because it was a couple of $100,000 a year to keep going on with the effort. We still get people coming who want to get training, even 7 years, because we did it for 5 years, pretty solid, somewhere between 10 and 25 classes a year in Crossville or other places. So, but now I think there's a lot more residential people wanting to get into it. So we decided last year that we would use the National Tile Contractors Association, is actually before COVID, was doing in-person training sessions around the country using the standards as the basis for training. And that way the message and the training can spread a lot faster than just, the small technical services team at Crossville doing something in Crossville.
Right.
So not only did it decrease what we had to spend, but it got us where we needed to go. And it'll bring, I think what we'll see is a lot of that will focus on the residential. It'll be the guys that weren't doing it and we're watching it, and see where it goes, that now see the potential in it going in, especially if they're competing, in really hard markets where the labor, costs are low and everybody can put in 12 by 24s for something that barely gets them by. If they can, they can become niche and they can become, it can be something better than that they can offer that their competitors aren't. So I think we'll see a bigger push into residential.
Right, right. Yeah, I know in some of our show house opportunities, we've seen designers use the panels on fireplace surrounds, so
Yeah.
beautiful, and shower walls.
Yeah.
That efficiency that works for commercial also
Yeah.
works for residential.
And we
So that's
also tell
beautiful.
people for residential, don't always assume that you got to use a full size panel. Why not cut it in half, make it easier to get in your house and up the stairs, or, really,
Good
you
point.
got rid of 40 grout joints. So you can be okay with one now,
Right.
So we do say, don't expect that, don't have an expectation that it has to be this huge thing. It can easily be, and it's easily cut in the field, scored and snapped. So I think we can, utilize some of that for residential, which is, think beyond.
Right. That's the new opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah, even for backsplashes in the kitchen, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's just a matter of having that capability, having the great product, and then
Right.
getting creative about where it goes. And that's part of
Yeah.
the fun of our industry, is getting this
Yeah.
new innovation.
And the tools and the skill sets out there are evolving incredibly fast too. So, somebody wants to learn, they can learn.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, awesome. Well, this has been some fabulous information, Noah,
Good.
as usual.
Yeah, I hope it wasn't too much. I know the
No, no,
standard
this is
stuff
our
is,
chance to go deep. I think
okay.
that's the good part about our Tile Tech Talk is because we have our talking points and we share a lot of this information elsewhere, and certainly those CEUs are out there. But to have a true conversation where
Yeah.
who live and breathe this and have
Yeah.
been so vital to the progression can give us the scoop. I love it. I love
I'm
it.
ready for a new subject. We're going to keep working on this one, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people, we still have people say, well, I've just been introduced to this product, even today. And,
I
it's like, well,
know.
okay, 8 years I've been,
Oh, and
eight
that's
years we've been working on, things.
well, and that's why I
So,
wanted to start at base level with this conversation, because there are going to be people who are newly interior designers. They haven't been introduced, whatever
yeah,
their story. There are always going to
yeah,
be people out there that are new to this.
yeah,
And certainly that's why I always mention measured in feet, not inches. When I
right.
say tile, don't limit what you're picturing in your mind. This is the big
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah. I
So,
appreciate the opportunity to have the conversation about it, because I don't think we do all this stuff in the background as Crossville. And we don't scream about it from the mountaintops. It's not kind of what we do. But we do a lot to try and make sure. And I hope that the customers come to us not only find that we have, I honestly believe the highest quality product in the market, but we can bring the knowledge of, all of this other information to bear and, to make their project successful. And we do that from a place of understanding of a lot of the background and how things got to where they are. So I hope that provides value to our customers,
I
so
would
they can,
imagine it
judge.
will. If for
Yeah,
me,
I hope so.
I manage the PR and social media, and I always feel so good about the messages I'm bringing out to the marketplace because it's legit. The root system is there in
Yeah,
everything
for
we're
sure, for
doing.
sure. Everybody's working hard for that part. So yeah, I think we do a good job at it.
Well, awesome. Well, we will share a transcript of this
Okay.
conversation, and I'll provide links to our case studies and even the product pages. So we
Okay.
will make sure people have every opportunity to get the scoop. So once again, so grateful for your time and all the good scoop.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks
All
so much.
righty.
Talk
Of
to you soon. Have a
course.
great day.
All righty. Thanks.